On December 2020, the United Kingdom, UK, and the European Union, EU, made a special trade agreement. This agreement allowed them to trade goods with each other without extra charges like taxes or limits on how much they can trade. This was really important because it prevented something called a no-deal Brexit, which could have hurt the UK's economy a lot. Even though the agreement helps with trading goods, there are still some checks when goods move between the UK and the EU. So it's not as easy as it used to be when the UK was part of the EU. Due to these restrictions, many people in the UK think that Brexit was a mistake. They want to have another vote to decide if they should do it all over again. But that looks a bit difficult right now. Stay tuned until the end of the video, as today we will uncover the economic implications of Brexit, why the UK might want to rejoin the EU, and lastly, the feasibility of that happening. Even though Britain officially left the EU, trade and customs between them continued. So for the people living in the UK, their everyday life didn't feel very different. But leaving the EU still had an impact on Britain's economy. The money the country was making, basically the GDP, didn't grow as fast after they decided to leave the EU. It slowed down from 2.2% in 2016 and 2.4% in 2017 to around 1.7% in 2018. The experts thought this would grow even less, only about 1.3% in 2019 and 1.4% in 2020. Surprisingly, it was a bit better, with 1.6% growth in 2019, but things got tough in 2020 and the GDP went down by 11%. Thankfully, the economy started to get better in 2021 and the GDP bounced back a bit with a growth of 7.6%, but in 2022 it slowed down a bit to 4.1%. This led to far greater criticism from the masses. According to surveys, more and more voters now believe that Brexit was a mistake, and most Brits want to have another vote on the issue. According to a recent YouGov poll, 57% of Britons think voting for Brexit in 2016 was wrong. This is the highest number recorded by YouGov so far. On the other hand, only 32% believe it was the right decision. What's interesting is that 19% of those who voted to leave now say it was the wrong choice. But right now, none of the major UK political parties are saying they want to rejoin the EU if there's a new election. Even the Labour Party, which is usually more pro-EU, said they don't want to rejoin the single market and the customs union. The Liberal Democrats only want to rejoin the single market, not the whole EU. Clearly, most of the UK's politicians don't seem interested in rejoining the EU. Even though some people in the UK are starting to like the idea of being part of the EU again, it's still unlikely to happen soon. That's because no major party has it as a plan, and the EU might not agree to it anyway. And recently, Michel Barnier, who used to be in charge of negotiating Brexit for the EU, said something interesting. He was on a TV show and he said that the UK could actually ask to rejoin the EU if they wanted to. But would the EU allow the UK to come back? Well, let's see what the EU might think about it. There are a couple of reasons for and against the UK rejoining. Let's start with the reasons against it. One reason is that the UK rejoining could make it harder for the EU to become more politically united. When the UK was part of the EU before, some people, especially the French, thought that the UK held back the EU from getting closer together politically. You see, the UK preferred to let more countries join the EU, like those in Eastern Europe, rather than focusing on things like using the same money, the euro, or having no borders between countries, Schengen. Also, the UK chose not to be part of the Schengen area or use the euro currency. Some experts think that the coronavirus bailout, where EU countries agreed to borrow 715 billion euros together to handle the pandemic, might not have happened if the UK was still in the EU. And some people inside the EU believe that they need to make changes before letting new countries join. They think that the UK's size and not wanting more integration could slow down those changes. Another reason is that the EU might worry that the UK could cause more problems if it rejoins. It might seem obvious, but the EU would want to be really sure that the UK has completely moved on from Brexit and is committed to being a part of the EU. For example, if a potential Starmer government wanted to apply for membership, the EU might be cautious if the Conservative opposition still didn't like the EU. They wouldn't want a situation where the UK joins the EU and then leaves again in a few years. The EU wants the UK to be steady and committed to being a member, as they don't want any more trouble from a member state. Now let's see why the EU might actually want the UK to come back if the UK is fully committed to being part of the EU. What would they gain from it? Well, a few important things. First, and most obviously, the UK would be one of the biggest economies in the EU, and that means it will contribute to the EU budget and be great for the single market. Second, the UK has one of the largest militaries in Europe, so having them back could help the EU develop a better defence policy. Third, if the UK rejoined, it could be a great example for other countries, showing them the benefits of EU membership and preventing more anti-EU feelings within the EU. However, if the UK wants to rejoin the EU, there are some things they need to do. First, both sides have to really want it. Then, the UK has to meet certain conditions called the Copenhagen criteria. Let me explain those criteria in simple terms. Number 1, political. The UK needs to show that it shares the same values as the EU, has strong institutions, and a good system of checks and balances. Number 2, economic. The UK should have a well-working and strong market economy. And number 3, administrative and institutional. The UK has to prove that it can handle and follow all the EU laws properly. Since the UK was already a member before, it probably meets these criteria easily. But there's a bit of a problem with the euro and the Schengen area. You see, new member states usually have to use the euro currency and have no border controls in the Schengen area. The thing is, it's tough to imagine the UK giving up their own currency, the pound, for the euro, or getting rid of their border controls. If the UK wanted to rejoin, they might ask for special exceptions here, but that could cause some issues with their application. Now, technically, there's no fixed time for the UK to follow these rules. Some countries, like Cyprus, Romania, and Bulgaria, are still not in the Schengen area, even though they should be. And 7 countries, like Bulgaria and Poland, are in the EU but don't use the euro. But the EU would want guarantees that the UK won't do this, as it could make EU integration harder. So, even though it's legally possible, but the political challenges make it unlikely for the UK to join the EU again anytime soon. That's it for today. And now, we invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. Do subscribe to the channel if you like our content. We will catch you in the next one. Bye.